I am 28 years old. A widowed father. A man who has spent the last 2 months breaking his back to build a home that was never mine. And tonight, I learned exactly where I stood. Thanksgiving was supposed to be a time of warmth, laughter, and love. A rare moment where family could sit together, share stories, and forget the troubles of life, even if just for a few hours. But this Thanksgiving? This was the night that shattered something inside me. The dining room was filled with the rich aroma of roasted turkey, buttered rolls, and cinnamon-scented pies. The table was set with the finest china, glasses filled to the brim, laughter bubbling around us like everything was perfect. But perfection is an illusion, one that cracked the moment my father put down his fork, cleared his throat, and said, "We're not going to babysit your kids anymore." At first, I didn't react. The words felt misplaced, like they had somehow landed in the wrong conversation. I blinked, forcing a chuckle, waiting for the punchline. But the joke never came. My father's expression was set in stone, unmoving, unwavering. The warmth in the room suddenly felt suffocating, the once inviting glow of the chandelier now harsh and unforgiving. Silence. I could feel every set of eyes shifting toward me, my children, my father. My son, 8 years old, lowered his fork, confusion flickering in his innocent eyes. My 6-year-old daughter, always a ball of energy, now sat unnaturally still beside me, her small fingers curling around the edge of the table as if grounding herself. They didn't fully understand, but they could feel it, feel the weight of my father's words pressing down like a hammer. And then, as if he hadn't already punched me hard enough, my father added, "Your kids are too much. They're not like your sisters. Hers are quiet, well-behaved, easy." Something inside me twisted, so hard, so violently that for a moment I wasn't sure if I could breathe. I turned my head slowly, my gaze locking onto my sister. She sat across from me, her plate still full, her glass untouched. And on her lips, a smirk. It was small, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. She knew. She had known this was coming. She didn't defend me. Didn't speak up. She just sat there, basking in the unspoken triumph of it all. I had worked on this house for 2 months. 2 full months. Every spare moment, every free hour, spent sweating, covered in dust and grime, making sure my parents' new home was perfect. I had ripped up old floors and installed new ones. I had spent sleepless nights fixing the plumbing. I had repainted these very walls that now seemed to close in around me. I had rewired electrical outlets, patched up cracks, tightened every screw, checked every hinge, made sure every damn thing in this house was flawless. And all I had asked for, all I had ever asked for, was occasional babysitting. Not every day. Not even every weekend. Just when I needed it. Because I was alone. Because my wife had died, and I was doing everything in my power to raise 2 children on my own. And yet, here my parents were looking me in the eyes and telling me, no, informing me, that my children were a burden. That they weren't good enough. That they weren't as well-behaved as my sister's perfect, precious angels. A bitter taste filled my mouth. I put my fork down carefully, slowly, deliberately. My hands felt cold. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it, a steady drumbeat in my ears. "Really?" I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a knife. My father didn't answer. My mother fidgeted with the edge of her napkin. "Then I'll stop fixing your house," I said. The words landed like a slap. For the first time, I saw something flicker in my father's eyes, shock. He hadn't expected that. My mother let out a small gasp, her hand flying to her chest like I had just told her I was burning the house down instead of simply walking away from it. "You don't mean that," she said, rushing to smooth things over, her voice suddenly sweet and soft, like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "We're just tired. You don't understand how hard it is for us." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Hard," I repeated, shaking my head. "You sat in your old apartment while I worked my ass off, making sure this house was perfect for you. I did everything, for free. And the one thing I asked for was help. Just a little help." I inhaled sharply. But I guess even that was too much. A few of our relatives exchanged uneasy glances. One of my aunts whispered, "That's not right." Another uncle cleared his throat, shaking his head in disapproval. "He saved you thousands," my uncle finally said, his voice firm. "And you can't watch your grandkids once in a while?" Still, my sister remained silent. Still, she smirked. I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs scraping against the polished floor, a sound that sliced through the heavy silence like a blade. My hands shook, but not from fear. Not from sadness. From something deeper. I stood. I looked at my father. I looked at my mother. I looked at my sister. And I saw them for who they really were. "Thanks for dinner," I said, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut. I'm extremely grateful. And then, without another word, I turned away. My mother called my name. My father just stared at me, his lips parted, unable to form words. My sister? She didn't move. As I walked toward the door, I felt it, something inside me breaking, splintering, crumbling into dust. And once broken, some things can never be put back together. The night air hit me like a slap as I stepped outside. Cold. Biting. But not nearly as cold as the feeling clawing its way up my chest. I walked to my car in silence, my hands clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. The world around me blurred, streetlights stretched into long hazy lines, the distant hum of traffic faded into a hollow buzz. My mind raced, replaying the dinner scene over and over. My father's words. My mother's excuses. My sister's smirk. Your kids are too much. They're not like your sisters. I gritted my teeth. I had spent 2 months, day after day, fixing their house, working myself to exhaustion. For what? So they could sit back and decide my children weren't good enough for them? A lump formed in my throat, thick and suffocating. I reached the car and pulled open the door, but before I could get in, I heard the soft patter of footsteps behind me. Daddy? I turned. My son stood there, his small frame dwarfed by the darkness of the night. His little hands were clenched at his sides, his eyes wide and searching. He had followed me. I exhaled slowly, kneeling so we were eye level. Hey, buddy. My voice was gentle, but I could feel it shaking. What are you doing out here? He hesitated, shifting on his feet. Are we leaving? His words nearly broke me. I swallowed hard, my hands instinctively reaching out to fix the collar of his tiny sweater. He looked so much like his mother. The same soft brown eyes. The same way he chewed his lip when he was nervous. I forced a smile, though my chest ached. Yeah, kiddo. We're leaving. He nodded slowly but didn't move. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it, he asked, Did Grandpa mean what he said? The question hit like a gut punch. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Because what could I say? That, yes, his grandfather, the man who was supposed to love and protect him, had decided he was too much? That his grandmother, the one who had once held him as a baby, had sat there and let it happen? That his aunt, the woman who had once called herself his favorite, had smiled while his father was humiliated in front of him? A sharp sting burned behind my eyes. I pulled him into a tight hug, pressing my face against his hair, breathing in the familiar scent of soap and childhood. You're perfect, I whispered. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. His little arms wrapped around me, and for a brief moment, the rage inside me softened. Then the front door creaked open and my mother's voice sliced through the night. Wait. I looked up. She stood on the porch, wringing her hands together, her expression laced with forced concern. Behind her, my father lingered in the doorway, his arms crossed. My sister wasn't there, and I knew why. She had won. She had gotten exactly what she wanted. I exhaled through my nose, standing up but keeping my son close. What do you want, Mom? My voice was tired, drained. She took a hesitant step forward. Don't leave like this, she pleaded. This is family. We can work this out. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Work this out. I repeated. Like how you worked it out at the table. By sitting there while Dad insulted my kids? While everyone acted like I was asking for too much. Her face paled. You're upset. You're not thinking clearly. No, I cut in, my voice sharp. I'm thinking very clearly. For the first time in years. She flinched. We didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't mean for me to fight back, I corrected. Silence. I shook my head. For 2 months I gave up my time, my energy, my sleep, to make your house perfect. And you couldn't even find it in your heart to help me when I needed it most. I took a deep breath, my jaw tight. I won't forget that. Her lips trembled, her eyes glistening under the porch light. She turned to my father as if hoping for support, but he just stood there, silent and stiff. He had already made his decision. I turned back to my son, rubbing his back gently. Come on, buddy. Let's go home. I opened the car door, helped him in, then walked around to my side. My mother stepped forward like she wanted to stop me, but I gave her a look that made her hesitate. I got in. Started the engine. My mother's voice cracked as she called out one last time. Please. I didn't look at her. I didn't look at my father. I pulled out of the driveway and drove into the night. With every mile that passed, the weight on my chest grew lighter. Because I knew deep down that this wasn't just a drive home. This was the beginning of something else. Something new. And for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, I was done being used. I was done being silent. And I was done being their son. I drove in silence, the road stretching endlessly in front of me, swallowed by the night. The city lights flickered in the distance, blurred by the storm raging behind my eyes. My hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every muscle in my body was tense, my jaw aching from how hard I was grinding my teeth. Your kids are too much. They're not like your sisters. My father's words echoed in my skull, each syllable twisting deeper like a knife being driven straight into my heart. I swallowed hard, blinking rapidly as the streetlights streaked past. I couldn't cry. Not now. Not in front of my son. I stole a glance in the rearview mirror. He sat there, small and quiet, his face turned toward the window. His little hands were clenched in his lap, his shoulders hunched forward. He wasn't asleep. He was awake, silent, thinking. And that's what hurt the most. He had heard everything. He had felt it. He had understood it. He knew that the people who were supposed to love him unconditionally, the people he had called grandma and grandpa his whole life, had just rejected him in the coldest, cruelest way possible. I had spent years trying to protect my children from pain. But this wound was deeper than any scraped knee or broken toy. This was the kind of pain that settled into a child's bones, that became part of them, that whispered in the back of their mind forever. And I hated my parents for doing this to him. I thought about turning around. For just a second, I imagined slamming my foot on the brake, spinning the car around, marching up to my parents' perfect little house and tearing into them. I imagined standing in their pristine renovated living room, the one I had rebuilt for them with my own hands, and demanding to know how they could sit there so calm, so smug, and tell me my kids weren't good enough for them. I imagined telling my father that I had spent my whole life trying to be the son he wanted, that I had done everything right, that I had worked hard, stayed responsible, built a life he should have been proud of. And for what? To be dismissed. To be treated like a worker instead of a son. To be used. But I didn't turn around. Because what was the point? Nothing I said would change them. Nothing I did would make them love my children the way they deserved to be loved. I thought about my wife. I still dreamed about her sometimes. In the dreams she wasn't sick. She wasn't weak or pale or fading. She was alive. She was laughing. She was holding our children, spinning them in circles, her hair catching the sunlight. And in those moments I forgot that she was gone. But then I'd wake up. And the house would be empty. And the bed would be cold. And I would remember all over again that I was alone. That it was just me now. That I was the only one left to love our children, to protect them, to give them the life she would have wanted for them. And I had been doing it. I had been holding it together. But tonight it felt like I was unraveling. Because how could I explain to my son why his own grandparents didn't want him? How could I look him in the eye and tell him that he wasn't the problem? How could I make sure he didn't carry this with him forever? The house was dark when we pulled into the driveway. I turned off the engine, but I didn't move right away. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel my son watching me. I forced myself to breathe, to push the anger down, to swallow the grief threatening to choke me. Then I turned around. "Hey, bud," I said softly. He looked at me, his big brown eyes, so much like his mother's, filled with a quiet kind of sadness. I hesitated, my throat tight. I wanted to tell him that everything was okay, that nothing had changed, that we were still surrounded by people who loved us. But I couldn't lie to him. He was old enough to know the truth. "From now on," I said carefully, "it's just us, okay?" His lip trembled, but he nodded. "Just us." I reached over and smoothed his hair. "Yeah, buddy, just us. We take care of each other." He swallowed hard, then whispered, "Okay." That one word shattered me. Because he wasn't just agreeing. He was accepting it. He was accepting that his grandparents, the people who were supposed to cherish him, had cast him aside. That they had made him feel less than. And that broke something inside me. I climbed out of the car, walked around, and lifted my daughter into my arms. She was still sleeping, her little face peaceful. But for how long? How long before she, too, realized that the people she had once run to with open arms didn't want her? How long before she asked me why? I carried her inside, my son trailing behind me. The house was cold and quiet, but at least it was ours. I tucked them into bed, kissing their foreheads, smoothing the blankets over their small bodies. Then I sat on the edge of my son's bed and ran a hand through my hair. "Listen to me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't care what anyone says about you. You're perfect. You're smart and kind and funny, and there is nothing wrong with you. Nothing." He stared at me, his small fingers gripping the blanket. "But Grandpa is wrong," I cut in gently. Grandpa is so wrong. And if he can't see how amazing you are, then that's his problem. Not yours. His eyes welled up with tears. I reached out, pulling him into a hug, holding him tightly against my chest. I had lost my parents tonight. But they had lost us. And I didn't feel sorry for them. I felt sorry for the fact that one day when they were old and alone, when their perfect daughter was too busy to pick up the phone, they would realize what they had thrown away. But by then it would be too late. Because I was done chasing love that was never meant for me. And I was done letting my children believe they had to earn it. Morning came too soon. The golden light of dawn streamed through the curtains, painting soft patterns on the walls. The house was quiet, almost eerily so, except for the rhythmic tick of the clock on the wall. But inside me there was no quiet. Only a storm. I sat at the kitchen table, my fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee I wasn't drinking, staring blankly at the surface. The air still carried the warmth of my children's sleepy hugs from earlier, but it wasn't enough to shake the cold that had settled into my bones. Last night had changed something. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was grief. Not for what I lost. No, I had never really had my parents, not in the way a child should. I had only ever had their expectations, their demands, their rules. I had spent my whole life trying to earn a love that should have been freely given. And I was tired. So damn tired. I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. My phone sat on the table in front of me, still silent. Not a single call. Not a single message. Nothing. They didn't care. They hadn't even tried to reach out. Somewhere deep down, I had been hoping, stupidly, desperately hoping, that when the anger settled, when they thought about what they had said, they would call. That my mother would leave one of her rambling voicemails about how things were misunderstood. That my father would at least pretend to regret it. But there was nothing. And wasn't that just the final confirmation? I was disposable to them. And my kids? Unwanted. My jaw clenched, my grip tightening around the cup until my fingers ached. They didn't even care that my children, their grandchildren, had heard every word. That my son had gone to bed with that weight in his heart. That my daughter, too young to understand, had felt the tension in the air. What kind of people did that? I swallowed hard, staring at the phone as if I could will it to ring, as if I could force them to care. But I knew better. I had always known better. This was who they were. And I couldn't change them. I could only change me. A soft creak of the floor made me look up. My son stood in the doorway, his small frame half hidden behind the wall. His hair was messy from sleep, his oversized pajama shirt slipping off his shoulder. But it was his eyes that caught me. They were searching. Hesitant. Like he was afraid to ask the question lingering on his tongue. I forced a smile, pushing down the lump in my throat. Hey buddy. You hungry? He shrugged. I guess. I stood, walking over to him, crouching so we were eye level. You okay? I asked softly. He hesitated. Then finally he whispered, Are we still going to Grandma and Grandpa's? I felt something inside me crack wide open. I wanted to tell him yes. I wanted to tell him that everything was fine, that this was just a misunderstanding, that we'd go back and they'd apologize and we'd have Sunday dinners again, and they'd love him like he deserved. But I couldn't lie to him. Not about this. I took a deep breath. No, bud. We're not. His brows furrowed. Because of last night? Yeah. My voice was steady, but it took everything in me to keep it that way. Because of last night. He chewed on his lip, his small fingers gripping the hem of his shirt. Did I do something wrong? And there it was. The question that gutted me. I reached out, gently gripping his arms, forcing him to look at me. Hey, I said, my voice firm. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. Do you hear me? But Grandpa said. Grandpa was wrong, I interrupted, my hands tightening slightly. He was wrong to say what he said. He was wrong to make you feel like you weren't good enough. And that's not on you, okay? That's on him. His throat bobbed, his eyes shining with unshed tears. But, if they don't want us, what do we do now? I exhaled, my chest aching, my heart breaking for this little boy who was trying so hard to understand something he never should have had to. I cupped his face gently, brushing my thumb against his cheek. We move on, I said softly. His lips wobbled. Just like that. I swallowed, forcing the words past the tightness in my throat. Just like that. Breakfast was quieter than usual. Even my daughter, usually full of giggles and nonsense stories, picked at her cereal. The weight of last night still lingered over the house like a storm cloud, heavy and unrelenting. I tried to act normal. I smiled. I joked. I poured extra syrup on their pancakes. But my son wasn't fooled. He saw right through me. Because he was just like me. A child who had spent too much time wondering if he was enough. Later that day, as I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, my phone buzzed. My heart leaped before my brain could stop it. I snatched it up, my pulse racing. Was it them? Had they finally? No. It was my sister. The message was short. Cold. Dad says you were out of line. You need to apologize. A bitter laugh slipped past my lips. Apologize? For what? For standing up for my children? For refusing to let them be compared like objects on a shelf? For daring to want my parents to love them as much as I did? My fingers hovered over the keyboard. A dozen different responses swirled in my head. But in the end I simply typed, no. And for the first time in my life I meant it. I wasn't chasing them anymore. I wasn't waiting for their approval. I wasn't begging for scraps of love. Because I had all the love I needed. Right here. In this house. With my kids. And they would never have to wonder if they were good enough. Because they were. They always had been. And I would spend the rest of my life making sure they knew it. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog, thick, suffocating, heavy with thoughts I couldn't silence. I told myself I was fine. That this was for the best. That cutting them off was the right thing to do. But some wounds don't heal overnight. And the pain of losing the people who were supposed to stand by you, no matter what, wasn't something that could be ignored. I went through the motions of daily life. I woke up early to pack lunches. I drove the kids to school. I worked long hours to keep our world stable. I came home and helped with homework, cooked dinner, read bedtime stories. But I wasn't really there. I was a shadow of myself, haunted by memories I couldn't shake, weighed down by everything I wanted to say but never would. My parents didn't call. Not once. They didn't check in on the kids. They didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't care. And maybe that was the hardest part to accept. Not the fight. Not the insults. Not even the rejection. But the silence. It told me everything I needed to know. I had spent years thinking that deep down, underneath all the coldness, all the judgments, all the comparisons, there was love. But love doesn't disappear overnight. It doesn't vanish because of a single disagreement. It doesn't punish. It doesn't ignore. And if they could let me go this easily, maybe they had never really held on to me in the first place. It had been 5 days since Thanksgiving. 5 days of waiting for a call that never came. 5 days of trying to keep my son from asking questions I didn't have answers to. 5 days of forcing a smile when my daughter still talked about grandma's cookies, like they were waiting for her. I hadn't told them everything. I couldn't. They were kids. They deserved to believe in kindness, in family, in unconditional love. I didn't want to be the one to shatter that illusion for them. But I couldn't lie either. They felt the shift. They knew something was wrong. And it was only a matter of time before the truth hit them full force. That evening, my son sat at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly poking his dinner with his fork. I watched him from across the table, my chest tightening at the look on his face. Lost, confused, hurt. And I knew before he even opened his mouth that the question was coming. Dad. I set my fork down. Yeah, buddy? His little hands gripped the edge of his plate, his knuckles going white. Are Grandma and Grandpa mad at us? I swallowed hard. It was the first time he had said it out loud. The first time he had voiced the fear I knew had been sitting inside him since that night. I could lie. I could tell him everything was fine. That it was just a misunderstanding. That we'd all sit down together soon and laugh about it. But I had done enough lying to myself. He deserved better. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. No, bud. They're not mad at you. His brows furrowed. Then why haven't they called? I hesitated, my throat tightening. How do you explain to a child that some people, even family, only love you when it's convenient for them? That some people only show up when they can control the terms of their love? That some people will let you go not because you did something wrong, but because you stopped bending to their expectations? I sighed. Sometimes people don't always know how to love the right way. He blinked. What does that mean? I ran a hand through my hair, trying to steady my voice. It means that sometimes even grown-ups make mistakes. Sometimes they forget that family is supposed to be about love, not rules. Not comparisons. Not conditions. His little face scrunched in thought. Like when you tell me to say sorry but I don't want to? A soft, sad smile tugged at my lips. Yeah, kinda like that. But I say sorry anyway, he pointed out. Because it's the right thing to do. I nodded, my chest aching. You do. And that's what makes you a good person. He frowned. So why don't they say sorry? I looked at him, this child who had already learned far too much about disappointment, about unfairness, about love that wasn't always kind, and I realized something. I wasn't waiting for their apology anymore. I wasn't hoping they'd wake up one day and see my kids, see what they were throwing away. Because even if they did, it would be too late. I reached across the table, squeezing his small hand in mine. Because some people don't know how. His lip trembled. But I missed them. And that was the hardest thing to hear. I nodded, my own throat tight with emotion. I know, buddy. I know. He sniffed, blinking rapidly like he was trying not to cry. Will they ever come back? I wanted to tell him yes. I wanted to promise him that one day, they'd walk through our front door with open arms, that they'd hug him tight and tell him how sorry they were, that they'd never make him feel unwanted again. But I had made enough empty promises in my life. So instead I squeezed his hand tighter. I don't know. He looked down at his plate, his shoulders slumping. And in that moment I hated them. I hated them for making my child question his worth. I hated them for making me the one to explain why love wasn't always enough. And I hated that, despite everything, he still wanted them back. Because that's what kids do. They love. Even when it hurts. Even when they don't understand. And I wasn't sure if that was beautiful or heartbreaking. Maybe it was both. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat alone in the dark, my phone in my hand. My sister had texted again. This time it was just 2 words. Are you serious? I stared at the screen. Then, without hesitation, I typed back. Completely. And with that, I turned off my phone, placed it face down on the table and walked away. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping. I wasn't begging. I was letting go. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real beginning of healing. The days passed like slow-moving shadows, stretching long and thin, refusing to disappear. Each morning, I woke up expecting something to change, a call, a message, an apology. But the silence remained, thick and unbroken, wrapping around me like a suffocating fog. It was strange how the absence of something could weigh more than its presence. For the first few days, I told myself I didn't care. I went about my routine, focusing on work, on my children, on anything but the gnawing void where my parents used to be. But the human heart is a complicated thing. Even when you know you're better off without certain people, the want remains. The need to be acknowledged, to be chosen, lingers like an old wound that refuses to close. And in the quiet moments, when my children were asleep, when the house was still, that need scraped against my ribs like a dull blade. They hadn't called. Not once. It was as if I had never existed. I told myself their silence was an answer in itself. But it still hurt. On the 7th day after Thanksgiving, I found myself staring at my phone again. A single message glowed on the screen. Mom says you're being dramatic. Just call them and get it over with. My sister. The words were casual, dismissive, like I had simply thrown a tantrum and needed to get over it. Like the months I had spent breaking my back to renovate their house meant nothing. Like the comparison of my children to hers had been a minor slip of the tongue instead of a knife straight through my heart. I tightened my grip on the phone, my pulse pounding in my ears. They still didn't get it. They still thought I was the one being unreasonable. That I should be the one to fix this. I exhaled slowly, staring at the message. Then, without hesitation, I typed my response. No. I hit send. There was no hesitation. No second guessing. Just one small word that carried the weight of a lifetime. No, I would not be the one to mend something they shattered. No, I would not beg for their approval. No, I would not continue to let them treat me and my children as less than. I set the phone down and walked away. For the first time in my life, I felt free. That afternoon, I took the kids out for breakfast at a little diner we had never been to before. The smell of fresh coffee and syrup filled the air, warm and inviting. My daughter giggled as she smeared jam onto her pancakes, and my son told a story so wildly exaggerated that the elderly couple at the next table chuckled. For a few hours, I forgot about the weight on my chest. For a few hours, I remembered what mattered. Not the people who had abandoned us, but the people who were here. The people who chose us. That night, as I tucked my son into bed, he looked up at me with wide, solemn eyes. Dad. I swallowed, already sensing the question coming. Yeah, bud. Do you think they miss us? A lump formed in my throat. I could have lied. I could have said yes. I could have told him that deep down, they were probably thinking about us, regretting their silence, wishing they had made a different choice. But I had done enough lying to myself over the years. I ran a hand through his hair and sighed. I don't know. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice so small it almost broke me, he whispered, I miss them. I closed my eyes, forcing down the ache in my chest. I know, buddy. I knew. Because I missed them too. Or maybe, I missed who I thought they were. And maybe that was the hardest truth of all. I pressed a kiss to his forehead, tucked the blankets around him, and whispered, "Sleep, bud. We've got a big day tomorrow." He nodded sleepily, curling into his pillow. As I turned off the light and stepped into the hallway, I made a silent vow to myself. I would not let my children grow up believing love was something they had to earn. I would not let them learn that family could discard you like an afterthought. I would not let them carry the same wounds I had. No more waiting. No more hoping. No more aching for people who never truly saw you as. It was time to move forward. For them. For me. For the family we were building. One that wasn't defined by blood but by love. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking back. The night stretched long and quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful, but heavy. The kind that pressed against your chest and refused to let you breathe. I sat in the dim glow of my living room, my fingers loosely wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second passing with an eerie finality. A week. A full week since Thanksgiving. Since I had walked away from the family I had spent my entire life trying to please. Since I had finally told them no. And they had chosen silence. I wanted to tell myself I was fine. That this was freedom. That I was better off without them. But if that was true, why did it still ache like an open wound? Why did it still feel like a part of me had been severed? I thought about all the years I had spent trying to be enough. The birthdays I had made sure were perfect. The late-night phone calls when they needed something. The house I had rebuilt with my own two hands. All the things I had given. And in return, I had asked for so little. A little bit of support. A little bit of love. A little bit of family. But they couldn't even give me that. The realization settled over me like a cold, bitter wave. They were never going to call. Not because they were waiting for me to apologize. Not because they were too stubborn to reach out. But because they truly, genuinely didn't care enough to. And that hurt more than anything. A soft noise pulled me from my thoughts. I looked up. My son stood in the hallway, wrapped in his blanket, his hair a messy tangle from sleep. He hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. "Dad." His voice was barely above a whisper. I forced a small smile. "Hey buddy. Can't sleep?" He shook his head. Then, after a pause, he said something that shattered me completely. "Are we still a family?" The words hit me like a blow to the chest. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "Of course we are. Why would you ask that?" His little fingers gripped the edge of his blanket. "Because we don't have them anymore." I exhaled shakily. My heart ached for him, for the confusion and sadness he was too young to carry. For the family he had lost. For the family I had failed to give him. I set my coffee down and opened my arms. "Come here." He didn't hesitate. He climbed onto the couch beside me, curling into my side the way he used to when he was smaller. I held him close, feeling his small body tremble ever so slightly. "We're still a family," I murmured into his hair. "We always will be." He sniffled. "Even if it's just us?" I pulled back just enough to look him in the eye. "It's never just us. We have people who love us, people who show up for us. Uncle Jake. Your teacher, Mrs. Thompson, who always makes sure you're okay. The neighbors who helped us when we needed it." He blinked up at me, processing. "Family isn't about blood," I said softly. "It's about who chooses you, who loves you, who stays." His little brow furrowed in thought. Then slowly he nodded. "Okay," he whispered. I kissed his forehead. "Okay." We sat there for a long time, wrapped in quiet understanding. And in that moment I realized something. I had spent so much time grieving the family I had lost, that I had almost forgotten to see the family I still had. My children. The people who had never left. The people who chose me every single day. Maybe I had been looking at it all wrong. Maybe losing my parents wasn't the end of something. Maybe it was the beginning. A new kind of family. A new kind of love. The kind built not from obligation but from choice. And as I held my son close, feeling his breathing slow as he drifted to sleep, I knew, for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping anymore. I was free. And I was enough. Life has a cruel way of teaching us lessons. Lessons we never asked for but needed nonetheless. I spent years bending over backward, proving my worth, believing that love was something I had to earn. That if I worked hard enough, if I gave enough, if I was enough, they would finally see me. But the truth was right there all along. The people who truly love you don't make you beg for it. I let go that night. Not just of my parents. Not just of the pain. But of the idea that I needed them to be whole. I looked at my children, my beautiful, wild, imperfect children, and I realized I had everything I needed right here. We weren't missing anything. We weren't broken. We were whole in a way my parents never were. Because love isn't about blood. It's about choice. And we had already chosen each other. So, to anyone reading this, to anyone who has ever felt like they were not enough for their own family, I want you to hear me. Enough. You don't have to keep proving yourself to people who refuse to see your worth. You don't have to keep fighting for a place at a table that was never set for you. You deserve love that is given freely. Without conditions. Without comparison. Without hesitation. And if your family can't give you that, then it's okay to walk away. It's okay to choose yourself. Because sometimes, the greatest act of love is simply refusing to accept anything less than what you deserve. So tell me, have you ever been in a situation like this? Have you ever had to walk away from people you thought would always be there for you? Drop a comment below and share your story. Let's talk about it because I know so many of us have been here. You're not alone. If this story resonated with you, if it made you feel something, don't forget to like this post to show support. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. Subscribe for more stories that hit deep. Because at the end of the day, we create our own families. And sometimes, letting go is the first step to truly finding home.